following up from last class, we finished last class by talking about a really important thing called sharecropping. Now, we're going to get to that in just a second, but if you remember, we also were going through several different situations and how they handled them in the Reconstruction South. So what I did is, based on those 4 different ones, we're going to go through them and talk about how they actually handled these in the South. So we're going to start with the land. So before we talked about, remember, in your little situation, you had to decide what is going to happen with this land that's in the South. Now, at the very beginning, what happened is that you had the 13th Amendment passed. If you will highlight the 13th Amendment. Now, we have a chart later on that'll summarize this, so I'm going to leave that for a little bit later because it's going to make much more sense. So the 13th Amendment bans slavery in the United States. Now, why that is important is you now have slavery gone, and you must figure out a good way to be able to make this successful. Now, what happens is that Sherman, who we all know Sherman from what event? March to the Sea. Good job. So with this March to the Sea, basically he becomes really well known in Georgia. And somebody's asking him, what are we going to do with all of this plantation stuff in the South? And Sherman says, we're going to give them 40 acres and a mule, which if you remember, that's how much I gave you guys, right? Basically, he said, we're going to take all the land we have acquired from the South, and we are going to give it back to those slaves who have been enslaved for hundreds of years. Now, the goal of that was kind of that reconciliation of getting that land back. And in his mind, we conquered that territory. We can do whatever we want with it. Now, following the end of the war, though, that's not what ends up happening. Slaves begin to get evicted, and they have to decide what they're going to do. So here's kind of how this is going to work. Now, some slaves were successful in buying their own land. Most of the slaves didn't. So what's going to begin, if you will go ahead and highlight the word sharecropping, which in theory that word is familiar, correct? Like we did a whole 50-minute activity on it. Maybe? If you weren't here, I'll give you a break. Okay? But sharecropping is going to begin, and if you will highlight or underline the word labor system, and then draw a little arrow next to it that says economics. Basically, this is an economic labor system where all these people are going to work jointly together. Now, while they work jointly together, right, let's have a quick review of what that sharecropping looks like. So in theory, this should sound familiar. You have a former slave. He can't afford his own capital. So he makes a deal with his former master, or whoever it is, a landlord, that they are going to make an agreement that he's going to help him, and in return, he gives him part of his crop. As the time goes on, he cannot afford to be able to do this system, so he begins to have debts to his landlord. As the harvest comes, he goes to sell that, but then the sharecropping landlord says, wait, don't you owe me some debts? Because of that, the former slave now has to pay back his landlord. He doesn't have enough money in order to be able to survive or create his own farm. And so what happens? He makes another contract. He goes through the whole system over and over again every single year. And basically, what does this become?
Slavery.
Slavery. It's like legalized slavery, right? It's a way to be able to get these people in the labor system where, yes, they are making money, but they're constantly in debt and can never get out. Another good example would be like indentured servitude. Very, very similar between those two. Now, what's going to happen to those former Confederate leaders, the ones that are going to be kind of a really hotly debated topic? What do we do with these people that betrayed us and caused all this massive amount of death? Well, yes, I will say Hunger Games came up a lot in our simulation. But if you actually have read the books, which is a different ending than the movie, then you would know why that's a bad thing. But anyways, that's a different story. So, with the Confederate leaders, what are they going to do? If you will highlight, majority of Confederate officers and enlisted men are pardoned. Now, why would they do this? Why would they pardon these people automatically? If you will put next to it the word reconciliation, and I will spell it for you. It is RECONCILIATION. Reconciliation basically means we're going to come back together and we're going to solve our differences and our problems. Basically what they said is if we continue to just fight over and over and over again, we're never solving the problems and we continue to have these divisions. So by pardoning them, the idea was that we would come back together as a nation even quicker. Now, the way that they did this is through what is known as, and this is down on your third bullet, far right, where it says loyalty oath. If you will highlight the word loyalty oath. Basically what's going to happen is with this loyalty oath, which you can see right here, is that what they would do is they would be required to sign one of these oaths. Now, these oaths would say that you agree not to rebel against the United States. You agree that you are going to be a good member of society. You are not going to do this and that. Basically, you're signing your loyalty to the United States. We still have these. People applying for citizenship have to sign one of these before they come into the United States. By signing this, you are now eligible in order to be able to obtain citizenship. Now, these two people, which this is my last class, and I'm wanting 2 for 2 on who could identify these people. Okay? So, on the left, we have... Okay, somebody obviously says something super wrong. If it helps, somebody last class said Abraham Lincoln. So, could be better. So, this is Jefferson Davis. Yeah, I know, but somebody over there said something giggly because everybody started giggling. Okay? So, this is Jefferson Davis, the former president of the Confederate States of America. What about this guy?
Robert E. Lee.
Robert E. Lee. Okay, some of you, I'm convinced, are just saying funny things and be funny. Now, oh my goodness. So, both of these were two, probably the highest respected and ranking officials in the Confederacy. Now, both of them are going to both of them have the opportunity to regain citizenship. They both signed loyalty oaths in order to stay in the country and not be prosecuted. Jefferson Davis was actually originally imprisoned and then sentenced to death, but he was able to get out of that because of that whole loyalty oath thing and the pardoning thing. Now, let's start with Robert E. Lee, because I kind of feel a little soft spot for Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee has said multiple times that he did not fight in the Civil War for slavery. As in, he did not say defenders of slavery. He did not say we're defending the Confederacy. He said he's defending Virginia. Why that is important is that this defense of Virginia kind of shows that he was defending his homeland. As soon as the war ends, he immediately applies for citizenship. Now, he attempted to be able to kind of reconcile these things that had happened before. He ends up becoming the president of a place now called Lee University. And while at Lee University, he had multiple times where there was people who were white, who were killing, assaulting, injuring people who were black. Every single time he convicted them, he would kick them out of school, he would go to the police. He really did stuff that other people didn't. Unfortunately for Robert E. Lee, he applies for U.S. citizenship only a few months after the war ends. Seward, who was the Secretary of State at the time, who we'll hear again later, Seward receives that, laughs it off, gives it to his friend as a souvenir, and it's hidden away for the next 100 years. So he applied for citizenship, was never granted it. He died without citizenship and said it was one of his biggest regrets. But he thought it was sitting there waiting to be signed. He didn't realize that somebody had given it away as a souvenir and it got lost. Back in 1970, it was found by an archivist at the National Archives. They ended up granting Lee his citizenship, saying that he was an exemplary American citizen. On the other side, you have Jefferson Davis. Jefferson Davis is the exact opposite. He hates the United States. In fact, this is what he says about it. It's been said that I should apply to the United States for a pardon, but repentance must precede the right of pardon, and I have not repented. Remember, as I must, all which have been lost, disappointed hopes, and crushed aspirations. Yet I deliberately say, if I were to do it over again, I would do just as I did in 1861. Does he show any remorse for his actions? No. He actually flees to Canada, and he writes a whole bunch of books about how much he hates the Union. Now, what happens is that a few years after, Jimmy Carter actually grants his citizenship as well, even though I think Jefferson Davis would have hated it. He grants his citizenship saying that we have finally ended this division between the North and the South. By giving him his citizenship back, we have officially reconciled. That was kind of the goal with all of this. Now, one other thing that's going to happen, though, is unfortunately these Confederate leaders still want to portray their opinions. And they are going to, if you will highlight on your second to last bullet, if you will highlight, many joined the KKK. Now, you probably know what the KKK is. It's the Ku Klux Klan, right? Now, at the time, this is going to be not as violent. So at this period of time, we're not as violent as we are going to get later on. The idea of the Ku Klux Klan was an organization specifically targeted at African Americans. Now, you might wonder why this hood thing, right? Why did that come up? The idea was that you were a ghost. And what would happen is that when you went and approached somebody who was black, they would know that you are the ghost of death and that they are going to die or be severely injured soon. Make sure you're staying off your cell phones, by the way. This is quite a large amount of your test and quiz. Okay? So what would happen is that they would wear this cloak as an intimidation technique against African Americans. Now, one other thing that you will notice as well is what is in the background of this picture.
Flaming cross.
It is a flaming cross. Now, why would that be there? Basically, what this is that the KKK truly felt like all of their beliefs were 100% supported by the Christian religion and the Bible. Everything that they did was justified through what the Bible said. Now, that is not saying that all Christians are part of the KKK. Let me just make that clear, because I always have one person who says that. Okay? Just like in Islam, how people who are Muslim are not all radical. Okay? What this is saying is that basically they took the Bible and they said, according to the Bible, we've interpreted that African Americans are bad. And according to the Bible, if you're bad, we can therefore hurt or kill you. Now, at this time, we are not going to have the violence rise. We'll talk about later how the violence rises at the end of today. Okay? But the KKK is going to rise. And the other thing that's going to happen is if you will highlight on the very last bullet where it says enact black codes. Enact black codes. Now, in theory, all of you did your homework and you know what a black code is based on what you read, correct? So remember, those were those laws that were those legal discrimination where you were able to discriminate against another person. Now, some of these laws were kind of a bit silly, right? So one of them said you cannot bury somebody who's black in a cemetery that's made for people who are white, right? Or another one said you can't play baseball if you are within 2 blocks of somebody who is white, right? So those were some of those laws. You also get to the ones that we've all heard of, like the ones that you can't have somebody who's black and white eat at the same section of a restaurant, okay? Now, black codes begin at this time as a way to discriminate, but they're not as severe as they are going to be later on. But we're just kind of getting those inklings a little bit of Confederate leaders wanting some more power in the South. Now, this next box, if you will draw a nice highlight around this entire box. So a highlight around this entire box. Voting rights, yep. If you will then star this box, and if you will write next to it, key concepts. This box right here represents one of the key concepts that is on the AP exam, just this box alone. And the reason I say it's important is because I have read your test, and I just happen to know that there is a good chunk of it about this section. Okay? Now, what the key concept asks about is 2 amendments to the U.S. Constitution, which are going to be the 14th and the 15th Amendment. Now, the 14th Amendment, if you will go ahead and highlight the word citizens, this, and if you write next to it, that might be more helpful, is citizenship. Now, African Americans are going to be the right to become citizens. The 15th Amendment, if you will highlight the right to vote. So now African Americans can be citizens of the United States and receive all those rights, and also they have the right to vote. So why was this such a problem with the suffragettes? So that's kind of what this key concept is about. Why did suffragettes, female suffragettes, have such a problem with it? So here are the issues. So first off, make sure you star that first bullet so you know what the key concept is asking is what was the cause of the concern. So the first off is the 14th Amendment. Now the thing is, according to the 14th Amendment, it specifically referenced gender. So it said all men born in the United States. The problem with that, so if you will highlight, Constitution says men, so Constitution says that men, because it now references men in the U.S. Constitution, that implies that the U.S. Constitution is only in regards to men. Therefore, can women ever receive the right to vote? No, right? And then we get the 15th Amendment, which is going to be the really important one, is that it's going to say that you cannot deny the right to vote based on race, color, or previous condition of servitude. What is that missing? Gender, exactly. So, according to that, do women feel like they will ever get the right to vote? No. So, what you need to put for that, so the second one, if you will highlight, women should also have the right to vote. These two bills become extremely controversial. Yes, women want African Americans to receive the different rights, but who else do they want to receive rights? Themselves, exactly. So if I vote for one thing, I'm going to lose my own rights. Now, if you take this paper and quickly move to the third page, and you will notice about 3/4 of the way down, there is a box. Okay? This box goes over all three of the amendments. I would suggest highlighting around the outside. So again, highlighting around the outside. I would star it and say must know amendments for the AP exam. So on the AP exam, there are certain amendments. There's 27 altogether. There are certain amendments that are must need to know. We already know that we need to know the 9th and the 10th Amendment, and if you don't know what those are, you should start reviewing those because those are from the very beginning of class. Now you need to know the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendments. So we're going to go through and highlight what you need to know on there so you know the difference between the three. So the 13th Amendment, if you will highlight, abolishes slavery. Slavery is now illegal in the United States. The 14th Amendment is going to be citizenship. So you can either highlight citizens or also just write down the word citizenship. And in the 15th Amendment, if you will highlight the right to vote, at least for African Americans. Now there's one more thing that I want to talk, well, two more things. I want to talk about the 14th Amendment. If you're huge into politics, you care about the 14th Amendment right now. The 14th Amendment is one of those amendments that has been really one of the ones that have been challenged really often in the U.S. Supreme Court. And the reason why, if you will highlight under the 14th Amendment, where it says equal protection of the laws. So basically what this says is that everybody has equal protection of the laws. What this was implying is that you can't say, well, I'm in Virginia, that's not going to count here in the South. Now it's saying everybody has to be able to do these laws. Now, if we were to compare this to today, do you guys remember a couple years ago when we had the gay marriage ruling? That was that really, really big one. The reason that was sued is because they said that how is it legal that one state says it is legal to have gay marriage, one state says it doesn't. We have equal protection of the, it's not up here, equal protection of the laws, which means everybody should be able to have the right to be able to have gay marriage, and that's what they determined with the U.S. Supreme Court. So that's a really important one to note. The other thing with the 14th Amendment, and we're going to get real political here, so this is like one of the only times, okay? So, a couple weeks ago, I don't know if you guys have heard of a guy, his name is Donald Trump. He is your president. If you need to research him, he's on Wikipedia. I know, right? So, Donald Trump a couple weeks ago was doing an interview on HBO, and nobody thought anything of it. It was like middle of the night. They actually premiered it at midnight because they thought nobody was going to actually watch this thing. So they premiered this, and it ends up being one of the hugest things in a long time because it would result in a change in the Constitution. So basically what he said in this is that his goal was to get rid of what is called birthright citizenship, which would mean that when you guys are born in the United States, you would not automatically become citizens of the United States. You would have to apply for it. Now, some countries like Germany don't have birthright citizenship. However, in Germany, you can apply and become a citizen within 24 hours. In the United States, that process begins when you are 18. It takes approximately about 7 years to fully get through the immigration process and become a citizen, and it's about an $8,000 cost. Now, I will tell you in terms of positives, he is not targeting the vast majority of you. He specifically said that his target would be the children of immigrants. So if you were a children of an immigrant, you would not receive birthright citizenship and you would have to apply for it. Now, what that would mean is for some of you, you would not be automatically a citizen of the United States. Now, this one thing I will tell you, because this got really heated, although most of you are just staring at me, so I don't know if you're as heated about it as other classes. But the one thing I will say is if he wanted to do this, he would have to actually change the U.S. Constitution. So it's not one of those things that they can just order. He would have to fundamentally change the U.S. Constitution to do it. And I don't know if he could. Most people say he can't. How do you change the U.S. Constitution? Great question. So you propose an amendment. Every single year there's about 2,000 amendments that are proposed to change the U.S. Constitution. The last one to go through was in 1991, which had to do with like the payments of congressional people, whatever. I'm sure it's really important, but I think it's a little boring. But anyways, so that was the last one in 1991. If you want to change the U.S. Constitution, it would have to be approved by 2/3 of the House of Representatives, which is very, very difficult to be able to do. Because right now the House of Representatives is usually around 55% one party, 45% another. So it takes a pretty big effort to change the U.S. Constitution. But he would have to actually change this. He can't just executive order it. Because the U.S. Constitution says that everybody born in the United States has the right to citizenship. But we will see. So that's just a little... You guys must be tired today. That's okay. It's because I got mad at you earlier, right? And so now you're all scared. Okay. So, anyways, what you need to know for this section, why suffragettes had a problem with these two amendments. I will tell you that I believe, if I remember correctly, there are 6 questions on the test about either the 13th, 14th, or 15th Amendment. So make sure that you know those, okay? So heading back to the front. So now what are we going to do with all those former Confederate states? Now, I heard a bunch of you say a couple things. Like some of you were like, just let them all in. Some people said, don't let any of them in. And it was really hard to decide, what are you going to do with these rebelling states? So what they decided to do, if you will star the first bullet, that's what they decided to do. Basically, they, number 1, they said the South can't rebel again, so you had to sign loyalty oaths. Number 2, high-ranking officials such as Jefferson Davis and Robert E. Lee would not be allowed in politics. And number 3, the South must remain racially equal, which we're going to attempt to be able to do. Now, the one thing that's very, very important about this section, on the 3rd bullet, if you will highlight or star bayonet rule, and what you need to know about it, that's the most important thing to know about this bullet. If you will highlight where it says military presence in the South, and then skip to where it says enforce the policies of the federal government. Basically what the fear was that if we don't have a police force in the South is just going to do whatever they want, and then it's going to be mayhem. Now what they're going to say is we're going to send troops to the South, and we're going to protect those. And it works for only 12 years. So we're going to come back to why this fails in a little bit, but you do need to know for this test that's upcoming in this quiz that they're going to send troops to the South in order to be able to enforce the laws. All right, so let's head into the political parties. Yay, political parties. All right, so political parties of the South. You need to know, or Reconstruction, you need to know the differences between these 3 political parties. So the first one that we're going to start with is we're going to start with the moderate Republicans. Now, remember, from what we know before, where in the United States are the Republicans mostly located in? The North, exactly. So if you will highlight Abraham Lincoln's followers, they are the moderate Republicans. Their goal is to, if you will highlight, willing to compromise for the betterment of the country. They are the modern-day Henry Clays. Basically what they say is we know if we come at a rapid approach, we're going to get tons of pushback and it's not going to work out well. Instead, if we compromise, we can get so much more to be able to be successful. So for example, Sherman comes up with this idea that 50% of the white population must say that they are loyal to the United States. As a compromise, instead of having the South rebel again, which is probably what would have happened had the Wade Davis bill passed, Instead, the 10% says only 10% needs to sign a loyalty oath. Okay? The next one, though, are the most important ones of this section. If you will double star the radical Republicans, and if you will put next to the radical Republicans, most successful in gaining African American rights. They are the people that said, do not forget why we fought this war. We fought this war to end slavery, and that is what we're going to do at any and all costs. Have you guys ever heard of the terms like far left and far right, where they are super far and they're never going to compromise? Yeah. That is the radical Republicans. They will not compromise. They will do anything they can to protect the African Americans in the South, and they're going to make a lot of enemies by doing it. In particular, the Democrats. So, the Democrats on here, what you need to basically know, did not gain much political power. Yes?
So you're saying that the radical Republicans were more left, right?
More what?
More left.
At this time, they would be considered more left than right, yeah. At this time, the whole terms of left and right doesn't exist until about 1980, though. But yeah, they're pretty far. Now, on the Democrats, remember, the Democrats are from what part of the country? The South. Which, remember, who does everybody hate right now?
The South.
The South. So who does nobody want to vote for? The South. Okay? So that's why they don't gain a lot of political power, is because we're still in that like raw Civil War feeling. If you will make sure to bracket moderate Republican to radical Republican, bracket those two, and then if you will write next to it the North, and then next to the Democrats, make sure you write the South. We still have a problem of people getting confused of which one's which, so just make sure you know it, okay? All right, flip into the next section. We can do this, guys. We got 35 minutes. I know it's super heavy today. I apologize. But you guys are going to be so smart after today, so that's a benefit, right? Right. I will tell you that last year's LEQ, the vast majority of people did this LEQ last year, and it was all on this entire packet. Possible hint from one of the possibilities for the LEQ. All right, so in terms of the next page, if you will put at the top of this, causation essay. Last year's LEQ was a causation essay on the effects of Reconstruction. So the question basically asked, what effect did Reconstruction have on the economics of the South? It's basically what the question was saying. This entire page, if you want to put underneath it, is the effects of Reconstruction life on the South. Thank you. Ayush. Not here. But we miss him a ton.
Must be New Year's.
Okay. So, this is going to be the effects of Reconstruction on life in the South. So the first thing I want to talk about is some short-term successes. So some of the short-term positives of Reconstruction in the South. So the first one, if you will highlight, opened up political opportunities and leadership roles. Now that you are a citizen and can vote, that means that you can be in the United States government. So here's a picture of some of the very first representatives of African Americans in their government. Based on what we know so far, what is the most likely political party that they're going to be a part of? It's the Republicans, right? Democrats would not vote them in. So they're going to go into Congress and begin to have some power, but does that mean they have completely equal rights? No, there's still segregation. There's still sections that are going to be for people who are colored, people who are white. It's going to be very common during this time. Now, you also have the creation of the schools. So make sure you highlight the word schools. The goal of this basically was to be able to allow African Americans the right to become literate. So if you'll write next to the schools or like a little arrow, this is going to be literacy. Now people can read and write in the South who are African American. One of the big people who wanted to be able to support this is a guy named Booker T. Washington, if you will highlight him. He becomes extremely controversial later on, so we will talk about his controversy later. But Booker T. Washington begins by advocating for education, and then later on he becomes very, very controversial, which we'll talk about later. Now, the one thing that I made a mistake on these notes, so listen very closely, okay? Under long-term negative impacts,
I was about to ask about that.
Yeah, at the very bottom, I put black churches as a negative impact. That is incorrect, so please don't assume that I'm trying to tell you that. If you put a line above where it says black churches, and either put next to it that this is a positive, or if you want to do an arrow, I just screwed up. So it's not a negative. I messed up. Okay? But with the black churches, basically what happens, this is going to be a social effect. So what's going to happen is in the South, these African Americans are going to want to be able to join their own churches that are going to be specifically kind of around African American traditions and culture, especially Christian and Baptist churches. Now, in the South, you can go there today and they still have black churches. They say a sign on the outside that says black churches, and you can be able to go in. Just because it says it's a black church does not mean it's illegal to go in if you are white. It's just going to be predominantly black. And they're super fun. They're definitely really lighthearted. And if you've ever seen a lot of movies, I went there when I was 7 one time. It's very similar to the movies. And everybody dances and sings, and it's quite exciting. But anyways, this can be kind of one of those social impacts of what's going on in the South. So now we have to get to the long-term negative impacts. Now, if you notice on this paper, which section is larger, the successes or the negative impacts? The negative impacts. So you need to make sure that you know the negative impacts. You need to know why Reconstruction was such a failure. So the first one is sharecropping, which we've already talked about before. Go ahead and re-highlight it and star it as a reminder that this is a must-know term. So either highlight it or star it so that you remember this is a must-know term. So remember, sharecropping is going to be that labor system. It creates kind of forever servitude of African Americans, former slaves in the South. Then we're going to get to two terms that if you will go ahead and bracket the term scalawag, and then also bracket the term carpetbaggers. And if you will go ahead and put next to it to know the difference between the two. A lot of people get them super confused, so make sure you know the difference between the two. So we're going to start with the scalawags. So the scalawags, what you need to highlight on here is if you will highlight Southern white Republicans who collaborated with Northern Republicans. And then if you will highlight in the last bullet, party for personal opportunity, even if that meant giving rights to slaves. So here's basically what happens. There are some politicians in the South that figure out that if they become Republican, they can begin to get some kickbacks from the North. So what they begin to do is they begin to compromise, and how these compromises work is you'll have a Northern Republican say, hey, here's $50 if you vote for my bill. Or, hey, here's some free land if you vote for my bill. Basically what's going to happen is they're going to begin to compromise. Even though it gives rights to the slaves, it helps you in terms of money. Oftentimes in political cartoons, you'll see them as like a salamander or some sort of a lizard. It's supposed to be like symbolic of somebody who's sneaky and slimy and will go and find their way. The most important one out of the two, though, so this is a starred term, is going to be the term carpetbagger. So again, if you will star the term carpetbagger. Now, if you see this right here, this is a political cartoon. So you have the African American, you have somebody who's white, and it says Southern types, the wolf and the lamb in politics. Who in this picture is the lamb, do you think?
The African American.
The African American, right? And then the white guy is going to be the wolf. Basically, what a carpetbagger does is if you will go ahead and highlight So a person from the northern states who went to the South after the Civil War to profit from Reconstruction. And if you will, in the very last blank, if you will highlight gain political and monetary advantage, and then underline disorganized situation in the southern states. So here's basically what a carpetbagger is going to do. Now, you might not even know what a carpetbag is. That's because it's not very popular nowadays. A carpetbag was an old type of suitcase. It was larger than a purse, and this carpetbag you would take around as like a little travel case. Who's ever seen the movie Mary Poppins? Okay, Mary Poppins' bag is a carpetbag. If you've ever seen Harry Potter also has a carpetbag. Now, what this carpetbag was is basically why it's called a carpetbag is because it would be lined, and outside it would be covered in carpet. Why we don't have carpetbags anymore? Carpets attract like bed mites and little bugs. And what happened is people's like purses and suitcases would be infested with bugs. So we don't have carpetbags anymore. But carpetbags became really famous as like moving place to place. So this is the common political cartoon that you will end up seeing. Basically what this shows is you have the carpetbagger, and the carpetbagger is going to go down to the South with this little carpetbag right here. And here's basically what he's going to do. He's going to take advantage of all the disorganization and illiteracy in the South. So let's pretend that you are black. And this guy comes along, and he says to you, you know, I feel really bad. You look like something's wrong. Why don't you tell me about your life? And you sit there for 2.5 hours, and you tell him how you can't make any money, your family's going to starve, you're sharecropping, and this guy's like, oh, you know, I'm so sorry. You know what? I have this little piece of land that I'm not using. I'm willing to sell it to you for 75% off for only, let's say, $25, which back then is going to be several $1,000s. And you can have this land for $25, no strings attached. You can finally feed your family and become rich. How likely is it that that African American is going to take that offer up? It's likely, right? So he gives him the $25. The guy gives him the address, says, go here. It's now your land. Here's the deed. The guy shows up to his wonderful new plot of land, and guess what? Doesn't exist, right? And where's the carpetbagger at? He's gone. He took your money, and he's gone, and he's not coming back, right? What's going to happen is that if you want to write next to it, it's kind of a way to remember it. This is your con artist. He's the guy that's going to come in, and he is going to profit off of people having no idea what's going on. So again, carpetbagger is going to be your con artist. And his biggest thing is going to be money. Now, up at the Scalawags, make sure you know that Scalawags are specific to politics, whereas the carpetbaggers are going to be more specific, especially towards money. Now, the Ku Klux Klan we've already covered, and we'll cover it again later, but now we're going to get into kind of like the major events of Reconstruction. So there are 3 approximate periods of Reconstruction, and we're going to kind of go through each of them to understand what's going to happen in each of these. So first off, Abraham Lincoln is dead. Okay? Abraham Lincoln dies, and according to the U.S. Constitution, when a president dies, who becomes the president?
Vice President.
Vice President, who at this time is going to be a guy named Andrew Johnson. Now, back then, they would accept as your vice president typically somebody from the opposite party of you. The benefit of that would be a great compromise. Now, I don't want to compare the Donald Trump-Hillary Clinton thing because I know that would be really, really hard to do with the current political administration. But if you think back to back to President Obama, Obama really respected Mitt Romney. He said multiple times that he really respects his politics as a person. So in this case, what would happen is Obama would become the president, but he would make Mitt Romney his vice president in order to be able to have kind of this collaboration between the two. Okay? Now, what happens is that Andrew Johnson, therefore, has 100% different political views than Abraham Lincoln. So what happens is when Lincoln dies, the new president completely disagrees with everything he does and tries to switch it up. Now, if you look at this picture right here, so this is a political cartoon of Abraham Lincoln and Andrew Johnson. Abraham Lincoln's on the right, and he says, a few more stitches, Andy, and the good old Union will be mended. So he's trying to fix the Union, right? And then Andrew Johnson on the left says, take it quietly, Uncle Abe, and I will draw it closer than ever, right? He's trying to stitch it together perfectly, right? Anybody can tell what's hanging around Andrew Johnson's neck. It is scissors. So what happens when Abraham Lincoln's going to die? He's going to cut all those stitches right back out, right? That's kind of what it's showing here. So with Andrew Johnson's presidency, let's start with the positives. So the positive of his presidency, and even if you want to write next to it that this is the positive. So the positive of Andrew Johnson's presidency is going to be the Freedmen's Bureau. And if you will highlight that this is an agency, and then protection to former slaves. Basically, this agency is going to attempt to help African Americans out. It turns into the Civil Rights Commission after the 1960s. But this is where you're going to get all those schools and people attempting to help those rights. But now let's get to the negatives of Andrew Johnson's presidency. Yeah?
You mean to say Andrew Johnson's presidency? It says Andrew Jackson on the beginning.
It's probably a mistake, yeah. It's just a mistake. It's Johnson. I put it on your chart correctly. I just wrote it on here incorrectly. So, with Andrew Johnson's presidency, things that are going to happen, if you will star or highlight stopped equal rights at the 13th Amendment. He believed that the only rights African Americans should have is they're not slaves, and then move on. If you will bracket the rest of those bullets, and if you will put next to that, protect Southern rights. Basically, what the goal is here is that they're going to protect the South. So what he's going to do is, for example, he's going to pardon almost everybody that was a Confederate leader. He is going to allow several states into the Union. He is going to protect states' rights. He is going to do everything he can in order to protect the South. Now, one way that he does this is as he begins his presidency, states begin to create those black codes. So if you will star those black codes, which again we've talked about previously already. So these are going to be those legalized discrimination, especially in the South, that begins to pop up. Now as we head to our second period, our longest period of Reconstruction, this is going to be our radical period of Reconstruction. If you will put next to this, most successful in gaining African American rights. So most successful in gaining African American rights. Now, the real reason for this is because it is going to be controlled by the radical Republicans. So the first attempt to be able to give rights is going to be the Civil Rights Act of 1866, an attempt to give African Americans very similar rights to what they have today. However, Andrew Johnson is going to veto it. So if you will make sure to highlight the word veto, Andrew Johnson vetoes this bill. He believes it has way too many rights for African Americans, and he is going to get rid of it. Now, we've talked about these before, so as a reminder, don't forget it. Don't forget it. Okay? So, what happens in this radical Reconstruction is if you will make sure to highlight this two sides thing, on one side you have, if you even put like a 1 next to it, you support complete abolition of slaves. What political party is the most likely to support that claim?
Republicans.
In particular, the radical Republicans. So if you'll put next to that or on top of it, radical Republicans. And then number 2 is protect rights. And what political party is going to be that? The Democrats, right? Now, as radical Republicans begin to push their beliefs and all their laws into Congress, Andrew Jackson is going to veto almost everything. Now, with Andrew Johnson's veto, okay, his goal is to get rid of these bills. What a veto means is that a bill is passed, it goes to the president then vetoes it to kill the bill. However, if 2/3 of the House of Representatives vote for that bill, it does still continue to go through. Eventually, Congress begins to get angry with Andrew Johnson because Andrew Johnson continues to support those Southern rights. And so what's going to happen is that Andrew Johnson is going to be impeached. Sort of. Okay? So what's going to happen with Andrew Johnson is they're going to say that he violates an act. Basically, he puts somebody into a position. They say it's illegal. And so they are going to attempt to impeach him. In an impeachment, the House of Representatives has to vote 2/3 in order to impeach that person. So Andrew Johnson gets impeached in the House of Representatives. This is why officially he was impeached. If you have the votes to get it in the House, you're officially impeached, but it must be confirmed by the Senate. One vote makes the difference, and it gets lost in the Senate, and he is not kicked out of office. Make sure you highlight that very last bullet to make sure you know that it was lost in the Senate by one vote.
Wait, so it's kind of like Bill Clinton then?
Yeah, so my second question was going to be, what is a more recent example of this happening? And that's Bill Clinton. Bill Clinton was impeached by the House of Representatives. He was not confirmed by the Senate, and he wasn't kicked out of office. A lot of people say, what about Nixon? Nixon was never impeached because he quit before they could impeach him, which really saved his face a little bit. He would have been easily impeached.
Wait, so they can still be the president even though?
Because it was never confirmed. So it's kind of one of those things like, let's pretend you do something super bad. You go to the principal and the principal says, we're going to suspend you for this many days. That has to go to the district to get signed off officially. If the district doesn't sign it, you're never suspended. And so what happens in this case is that's kind of what happens here, is that it's like, yes, you're impeached, but the Senate never signs it, so you're never actually kicked out. But according to the U.S. politics, you were impeached, you were just never confirmed the impeachment, and you weren't kicked out. So that's what happens with Bill Clinton. That's why Bill Clinton, and a lot of people have forgotten about it, but he was impeached. But Nixon would have been probably the one to be officially kicked out if he hadn't quit. But he did quit before. So he was never impeached. And then later pardoned, which we'll talk about later. In a while, actually. So what happens is that following this, your next president is going to be Ulysses S. Grant. Now, Ulysses S. Grant begins the presidency by doing this thing called waving the bloody shirt. So in an attempt to be able to gain votes for the presidency, he actually takes one of his Civil War shirts that he wore that has blood all over it. He would go in front of these speeches, and he would begin to wave it around as a flag and say, don't you forget what we fought for. Do you see this blood? This blood fought for stopping slavery. We fought to bring the Union together. Don't you forget it, and vote for me as the presidency, and it wins. Grant then becomes the president. What you need to know about Grant is that those next two bullets, if you'll kind of like put next to it, it's going to be success for African Americans. He was really, really good at helping African Americans out. What happens with Ulysses S. Grant? He begins to want to eliminate all slavery, destroy the KKK. He heavily prosecutes the KKK. He ensures that African Americans are getting rights. He helps African Americans gain the right to vote. All these different things are going to happen, and he is going to be awesome, as in helping African Americans. Now, Grant himself actually hated the presidency. He said multiple times he hated the presidency, but he did support African American rights. Do you guys want to hear a really sad story about Grant?
Yeah.
It's going to make you feel bad for him and his family, though. Okay. All right. So, what happens with Grant? So, Grant is getting out of the presidency. If you don't know, the president actually makes a ton of money. In today's dollars, the president makes about $450,000 a year as a president. They also get basically everything for free. So what happens is that when you're the president, you get all this stuff for free. You don't have to pay anything. You make a ton of money. Then when you leave the presidency, you get a pension. Yes?
Does the president get taxed?
Yeah, everybody gets income taxed. So that's why when Donald Trump, there was a huge thing with Donald Trump because when his first year, he said he wouldn't show his tax returns because you do have to file tax returns. The biggest thing I would say, though, is the president gets so much stuff for free that he doesn't hardly spend any of that money because he gets everything for free. Like if he wants to go on vacation, he gets Air Force One for free. So, yeah, you don't get a ton until afterwards. But yes, you do still pay all the taxes. So what happens, though, is that when you leave, you get that same amount of money for the rest of your life. Every single year, no matter what you do, you get $450,000 as a pension. Basically, that means that the president doesn't have to do anything the rest of their lives in terms of a job. They typically just are the president. That's why Obama will probably never get a job again because he doesn't need a job. Also, fun fact, in terms of current events updated today, the vice presidents also get a pension. It's about $300,000 a year. Joe Biden gets that amount, and so they go on all these speaking tours, and they just announced today that Joe Biden is coming in a couple weeks to the U. So if you're a huge Joe Biden fan, I would start looking into that because he's going to come do a speaker thing probably at the Huntsman Center. I didn't look into it, but if you're interested. Well, back then, they did not have a pension system. So there was no pension system, and when you were done with the presidency, you were cut off. Well, Grant's wife really liked to spend money, and she spent a ton of it. And then when he left the presidency and they had no money, she spent their entire wealth going shopping all the time. So what happens is he has to figure out a way to be able to help fund his family. Well, one day when he's down at his plantation in the South, he goes, and when we say plantation, we don't mean with slaves. It's just that's what they're called, is these giant mansions. So he goes down to his mansion, his summer home, and he goes to be able to eat dinner. He takes a peach and he bites into it, and his throat hurts. He's like, I should probably go to the doctor. He goes to find his doctor. His doctor is in Europe for the next 6 months. So he's like, you know what? I'm loyal to my doctor. I'm not going to go see him. He goes back home. He waits 6 months. His doctor shows up. He comes up to him and he says, you have throat cancer and you have 4 weeks to live. So now Grant's about to die. He has a wife and kids who have no money. And at this time, women can't really get a job. So how is he going to have his family be fed? So he decides to create a memoir. So he writes a book about himself, which he absolutely hated and despised, but he did it for his family. He also disses a lot of people in his book. So it was a total diss book. And a lot of people didn't like him after it, but they bought his book, and that's what's important. So he goes to write his book. It takes about 3 weeks. He's working 12 hours a day trying to write this book. He finishes it, he closes it, and he says, I've written all that I have to say, and he dies 3 days later. Now, this book is able to fund his family for the next several generations, and still funds his family today. So, kind of sad because Grant dies, but he did help his wife out, who spent all his money. So, positive thinking. Now, after Grant is out of the presidency, though, and if you want to say about good or bad presidents, I'll let you decide on all these different presidents. He was the only 2-term president up until Woodrow Wilson. So we go through about 6 or 7 more presidents where there's almost no 2 terms. You can't count Teddy Roosevelt because Teddy Roosevelt wasn't 2 terms because his other person died. But he was the only elected 2-term president until Wilson. So
No, Grover Cleveland, the guy that got elected and
yeah, but that doesn't count because that's not a consecutive term. And technically, Cleveland switched political parties for the 2nd term. But that's going into something nobody ever talks about Cleveland on the AP exam. So we'll get to Cleveland. Everyone kind of ignores him. But anyways, they have it's called the era of bad presidents for a reason because nobody remembers them and they're never on the AP exam. But we'll get there. So anyways, from here, though, we're going to get to probably the most important section because this is the most missed on the test. So make sure that you highlight, double, triple star this section. Now, here's what happens. 1867 comes along, and we are in a heated race for the presidency. Rutherford B. Hayes is going to be a Republican. Samuel Tilden is going to be a Southern Democrat. The problem is that when they go to do the election, it is directly split in half. Neither president or person receives enough electoral votes in order to be able to win the presidency. Based on what we know so far in this class, that means that it goes to who to determine the president?
House of Representatives.
Specifically the House of Representatives. Make sure you know that. So if you will highlight on there, that's okay. So if you will highlight where it says decided by the House of Representatives, it is not the Senate, it is only the House. So the House must now decide the presidency. This seems familiar to what other event in American history that we've talked about?
The election of 1800.
No.
A couple years off. 1824. Election of 1824, which is nicknamed what?
The bad one.
the corrupt.
The corrupt bargain. Don't put the bad one on the AP exam. So, with the corrupt bargain, as you guys remember, Henry Clay, remember John Quincy Adams, they make a deal and it puts him into the presidency. So here's what happens here. Rutherford B. Hayes goes and chats with the Southern Democrats. They tell him, you know what, we're going to give you the presidency if you take all the troops out of the South. What does that mean is going to happen to the South? Does the South have any protection for African Americans anymore?
No.
Nope. So what's going to happen in this case, so what you need to know is that second bullet is a double-starred bullet, is the second bullet. Bless you. They are going to compromise. Rutherford B. Hayes goes into the presidency. And if you will highlight federal troops withdrawn from the South. And what you need to know is the massive effect of this is going to be Reconstruction ends. And the other effect, so there's two major effects that you need to know. Reconstruction is going to end, and discrimination in the South rises. Basically, now that there is no police force to make sure the South does what it's supposed to do, everything is going to end, and now we're going to have a massive rise in discrimination against violence. So basically what happens is this is like your modern day corrupt bargain. With this decision made, Reconstruction ends, 12 years of progress ends, and now it's going to be a very sharp decline in African American rights that we don't begin to fix until the 1960s. Now, in terms of showing you kind of like one of the effects, I put on here a statistic on here. So in 1867, that's going to be Rutherford's election. 67% of African Americans who are male in the South are able to vote. Within only a couple years, by 1892, only 4% can vote. That's the kind of impact that we're talking about, is a massive, massive decline. So what we're going to talk about end class, we only have 5 minutes left, so just stick with me for 5 minutes. 5 minutes, you can do it, okay? We're going to talk about the massive effects of this decision, okay? So this back page, if you will write down that this is going to be the effects of Hayes's election / end of Reconstruction. These are going to be your effects of that decision to pull those troops out of the South. So we begin the period of time that is known as the Redeemer period. Basically, this is going to be people that are in the South, and if you will highlight, who sought to redeem their states from the misrule of the Republican Party. Basically, they are going to bring back the power of the South. That is going to be the goal here. Now, this redemption period, basically, if you will star the last two bullets, that kind of summarizes what is going to happen here. Now, what's going to happen is we're going to create the New South. So here's the positive of it. Next to the New South, let's talk about I starred the wrong ones in here. Shoot. Oh well, that's okay. So what's going to happen is this begins what is known as Jim Crow segregation. This is a double-starred term. Must know for the AP exam all the way through 1960. Now, Jim Crow segregation, if you will write next to this that this becomes legalized segregation. Now, if you've ever heard of a minstrel show, which like back in the olden days in Europe used to be like these really funny like little jester shows, in the 1840s and 50s it would be somebody who was white would put on blackface as somebody who was black. That character was what was known as the Jim Crow. That was like his name. And then he would make fun of African Americans, and people would go and pay to see this show. Now what happens is that this Jim Crow segregation is going to be because of the black coats. So the black coats kind of transform into this Jim Crow segregation. So if you want to put next to this, black codes, and then do like an arrow, becomes Jim Crow laws. Now, the New South is going to be the positive of this. Oh, by the way, in terms of Jim Crow segregation, by the way, this is what we're talking about. So if you've seen these pictures probably before of the difference between like the colored and the white side, that's what we're talking about here. In terms of the positive for the South is going to be economics. So if you want to write next to New South, this is going to be an economics term. And then if you will highlight Southern industry expanded dramatically, but agriculture remained the major economic force. So industry massively rises. However, agriculture is still going to be based on it. And the last two parts are going to be ways that they're going to begin to limit African American rights. Now, if you will bracket the last two, poll taxes and literacy tests, And if you will put next to this, restrict voting rights. Both of these were ways to restrict African American voting rights. The first one with poll taxes is what you would do is you would be required to pay a tax in order to be able to vote. So if you will highlight tax levied on the right to vote. Now these taxes did not have to be paid by everyone. So oftentimes that would be targeted against African Americans. And also it would become at a terrible time of the year, January. Why that would be is because that's after the harvest, which means you would have had to just pay off your sharecropping landlord. You therefore have no money. Can you pay the tax to be able to vote? No. So basically this was a way to be able to stop them from voting with money. The next thing are going to be what is called a literacy test. And if you will highlight, prove that they could read and write in order to vote. So basically, you had to prove that you had the ability to read and write in order to vote. Now, when you went to vote, whoever was in charge of voting would sit there and they would say, all right, you're good, you're good, you're good. And they'd be like, I can't tell if you can read and write. You have to prove it to me. So they would make you do these literacy tests. So here's an example of one that's up on the board. You would have to do this literacy test in order to be able to prove that you could read and write. Now, who typically do you think that they would target with this discrimination? African Americans, right? Now, the last thing I want to talk about is the rise of the KKK. African Americans began to feel like Reconstruction was a failure. The KKK, hey, stay with me. I got like a minute and a half, and I want to show you something. Okay? So the KKK begins to rise. Because of this controversy over what should happen begins to become conflicted. Now, what occurs because of this is the rise of violence, in particular lynching. We will talk later on about lynching and kind of its impacts, but one thing I want to show you in terms of this mass killings, if you look at this right here, this is somebody about to be burned at the stake. And if you notice what it says right here, what does that say? Justice. A little bit of an oxymoron. Hey, really quickly, I just realized I forgot to have you have something highlighted, and it's a question on the exam. So I need to find it really quickly, so if you'll just bear with me really quickly. If you will... Shoot. I'm trying to find it. Where's the term for black codes in here? Oh, if you will go to the second page, listen really closely because this is one of the questions. Second page where it says black codes, if you will star the first bullet, you need to know that the black codes came under controversy over what's the role of the state and the federal government, because the state codes were the black codes. Could the federal government supersede those? Okay, so don't forget. Third page, yep.